while we were watching?
Just wanted to go back and do it. Just wanted to go back and get into the armory next time and shoot the bastards. It's a horrible place, a horrible place.
So the last time you saw the film, you said, was within the past, say,
about 7 years ago.
7 years ago. And how does it feel different this time? Or does it feel different this time?
No, every time we see that film, it just reminds me, basically that's what made me, you know, that's what made me what I am. Britain is a strange place. In that era still, the 50s and 60s, they were trying to hang on to the old idea of the empire, even though it was decaying around them. So they were getting more and more disciplined, what's the word, more and more intransigent about their constant idea of what history was, that there was a privileged class. I don't really have it here, but in England the class system was still really strong. The upper class, the rich and the aristocrats and the royal family, and then the upper middle class, and then the lower middle class, and then the workers, if you like. And schools were organized in exactly the same way. When you were 11 years old, everybody in Great Britain had to take the same examination. It was called the 11 plus. And depending on how you did in that one exam at 11 years old, that decided where you went to in the rest of your life. So if you didn't do well or failed, you went to what was called a secondary modern, and you were taught to work in a factory, quite literally. If you did okay and were quite literate, you went to a grammar school, and you were expected to join the middle class and work in business. But if you did really well and came to the top 1%, you were expected to become part of the ruling class, and that's what happened to me. They made a terrible mistake because I did well in the 11 plus, sent me to these schools.
Now, you had said that when you had written about the film that you were first in another public school, mm-hmm. and that made it particularly difficult to go into this type of a environment.
The first one that we went to in 1961 was in Stockport near Manchester, and that was about 500 or 600 years old. It was actually founded by the Crusaders, and they were very liberal. The only rules really in terms of uniform were that you wore the cap and a jacket, but you could wear any trousers, any shoes, any shirts. And that was the period when the mods were happening, so we were wearing winkle pickers and drainpipe trousers and pink shirts and little thin ties. And no one was bothered. They were only concerned with how well you did at school. And that was 4 years we were at that school. So to suddenly move to Birmingham, because my parents moved, and go to this other school like that, was even more of a shock, because we knew that it didn't have to be that way, that it could be liberal and still be successful. It didn't have to be oppressive and violent and cruel. I mean, it wasn't just, the whole school was organized in this way that you could see there that at the very beginning when you're young, you were called fags in my school. And that meant that you were literally servants to the older boys. And then when you were 16, you became a junior bencher. That meant that you could punish people, but you couldn't whip them. And then when you were sort of 17 or 18, if you were particularly good at being cruel, you got the right to whip and punish people physically. And they were called just benchers, and they had their own room just like that, their own food, their own privileges, and their own uniform. But for people like me, the plebs of the school, they would come round and their hair had to be cut above the top of your ear. And it seems petty, but it drove them crazy if your hair got long. And of course I was constantly in trouble.
Right.
Because we'd been growing up in Manchester where there were the Beatles and everything happening. So hair didn't seem important. So it was a constant fight. The gym teacher in particular was very sadistic and would drag me around the school by my hair. And we learned a very easy trick, which was when they said, go get your hair cut, we went, okay, yes sir, and then just did nothing. And then the next week they'd say, go get your hair cut. Okay, yes sir.
Like he does in the film.
Yeah,
just
exactly. It's very accurate. It's very accurate.
Well, I think that in the U.S. we have, there are still these kind of ritualized forms of abuse. Obviously we're going through a period where bullying and everything is in the media And I know I had a whole thing where, when you transferred from the 8th grade up to the high school, they did Freshman Fridays, and that was the day when all the seniors could just do the same kind of things to you, and it terrified me so much I didn't go. I made my mother send me to another school, but so these things, I think we can all kind of relate to a lot of these
things that are in the film. With my school was the year before we went, there'd been this big scandal. The previous headmaster or principal was very gay, and had been caught by the police cottaging, soliciting in the toilets, the public toilets. And he was basically very good friends with the Queen Elizabeth. And the whole school, it turned out, had this great big gay sort of mafia. All the benches, all the prefects that could whip you were all gay. And he actually had a bed in his main room where he would basically use it as a casting couch. But he in fact hung himself in his room to avoid having to go to court and to try and keep the school out of a scandal. So the next person that we got as headmaster was actually married with children, which proved nothing, of course.
Because the tradition of the kind of the homosexual, it's in this kind of taking on the younger scums, and like we see in the film. And I mean that's pretty common in that kind of environment.
It's a very erotic environment. I mean, the whole sort of sadistic S&M thing, the special friends and so on. And there's a lot of pressure, especially when people are constantly being put in the showers and being, in my case anyway, being attacked and abused and played with, made fun of, whichever. We had our heads stuck in the toilet too quite a few times. It was quite a common thing. But it's always done in a very guilt-ridden way. The whole process of the homoerotic undertone is always riddled with guilt, which was really sad. Because the whole process of the school is corrupted.
Right.
It's all about, basically it's about power being based on intimidation and violence.
Well, you see that in the film. I think you see that a lot of the people are not necessarily, even the villains are not necessarily treated as quite as one-dimensionally as a normal villain would be seen. Some of them seem oblivious to what's going on. Some of them seem just troubled by it as well, even though they have to sort of continue it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film. No, it's a real vignette of a particular time in Britain too. And although people think that's gone, it's still there. Those schools are still there. Those private schools. Prince Charles went to one called Gordonstoun in Scotland, and he basically he's written that he was terrified, and it was in the winter in Scotland. It gets really, really cold, but they wouldn't let them close the windows. They would make them run around naked through the countryside in the snow and things like that. And if you did anything wrong, it was even worse.
Right.
And he apparently got terribly bullied and hated it. And in fact, one reason he hates his father is because of that school.
So when did you see this film, and how long after you were in school, or were you out of school when you saw this film?
If it was in '69, yeah, just out.
Just out.
Left school in '68.
And when you first saw it, I mean, what did you... Do you remember?
I just thought, thank God somebody's talking about it, because it was assumed that it was such a privilege to go to a school like that you were not supposed to say anything. I mean, to this day, we never told my parents what happened to me. Never. Because they were so proud that we were at this school. It would have devastated them to know that it was miserable. So we never said anything. And that's one of the problems, is it was never discussed.
And your parents never asked or saw signs that you were...
They never asked, and, well, they did finally see a sign when I stabbed the school bully.
Can you tell me about that story?
Yeah, it would be 1967, and there was this one person called Dave Rook. He was about 6'4", not very bright in terms of academics, but big. And he was the school bully. He was the one who would punch people, kick them, laugh about it, kick them again, knock them over, push them down the stairs. And for some reason, he got really obsessed with me. And so he would just torment me in every possible way, just grab my, the usual stuff, kicking me, bullying me, hitting me. He'd get my things out of my desk and throw them away or hide them. This particular day, we'd been working on a history essay, and it was about 8 pages long. We'd just finished it, and he came up and grabbed all my history paper and then set it on fire with a cigarette lighter and pushed it in my face while it was burning. And we were just in the process, we'd had a penknife to sharpen pencils, and we were cleaning my fingernails, and we just, that was it, that was the moment, just stood up and stuck it straight into his belly. And he went white, and it was one of those, it was like a movie. This red mark appeared in his white shirt and started to spread out bigger and bigger and bigger, and we thought, wow. And then, shit, I guess I'm not at this school anymore. So we just packed up, went home, walked home.
And did you get expelled for that?
No, this is the interesting part. We said to my mother, you're probably going to get a phone call about something. And she said, well, what happened? So we said, well, we stabbed someone at school. And the first thing that we did getting home was just throw the school uniform in the corner and get dressed in jeans and a t-shirt.
Did you feel free?
Yeah, because we were convinced that was it. Then the phone rang, and it was the school, and they said, please could you get Neil to come back to the school? She said, I don't think so. And so they persuaded her to ask me, and in the end we said, okay, we'll go back as long as we don't have to wear the uniform. They said, okay. So we went back. By this time the whole school knew what had happened. And we went through, we knew that there was a quadrangle with all these classrooms and a lawn that was only for the teachers. So we went in at one corner and very slowly, not in uniform, walked right across the teacher's lawn to the headmaster's office. And the whole school were looking out of the windows like that. And we went in, and there was Dave Rook with a new shirt and some butterfly stitches, we assume, and his mother and the headmaster. And we sat down thinking, uh-oh, here it comes. And then he says, we're going to ask David to apologize to you. What? Okay. He said, we've talked to him, and he's admitted that he's tormented you for years, and he's really sorry, and he hopes that he won't ever do it again, and his mother says as long as you buy him a new shirt, she'll forget about it. Whoa. And so we thought, wow, what is that, a reward for violence? Well, okay. So we said, fine. And they said, oh, by the way, we can't let the school know that you weren't punished. So you're going to have to stay at home for 3 days so they think that you've been punished, but it won't go on your report. No one will ever know. And we thought, great, 3 days off school, get to stab him, no problem. That was when we realized that, sometimes power structures work differently. It was sad to think you just had to stab someone.
Right.
But after that, we were known as Meg the Knife. And nobody touched me ever again. Nobody.
Well, that is the kind of the central thing about this movie that disturbs and provokes and caused controversy, obviously, when the film came out, which is this idea that, we see both in our society, the good and the bad. You always do hear stories similar like this. Once I finally, it's this sort of popular kind of cliche movie narrative about, once you fight back and then, nobody touches you, but there's lines to that.